Welcome to the Fundamentals of Carp Fishing in association with JRC. In this film, I'm going to be looking at feature finding, the things that you need to consider, the tools that you need to do the job properly, the pitfalls to avoid, and why this skill set is so important in your carp handling armoury. Now, the first thing to be aware of with feature finding is that it shouldn't be your first port of call. And by that I mean, if I wind the clock back to when I was younger and a bit more naive, all of my carp fishing was based around finding a feature within a part of the lake that appealed to me. So I'd get to the lake, and having read all the books and the magazines, there weren't videos then, you used to get settled into an area like the look of, where maybe there were some lily pads or some overhanging trees or an island, anywhere that the book said was a good spot for carp. Then you would put out the marker float, trying to find some sort of fluctuation in the lake bed that might be of interest, usually a gravel bar or a plateau or something like that. Pop up the marker float, put some bait around it, and then we'd fish it. And that was pretty much how carp fishing for me went on through the 80s and early 90s. Nowadays, my carp fishing is entirely different to that process. And I'm fixated solely on finding carp and then trying to present a rig within the area that the carp are happy to be in. And if you think about it, that's the complete opposite to the process that I adopted through my more formative years, which was about finding something and then hoping the carp would come to it. It's the complete opposite. So the best advice that I could give for people going about their carp fishing is to always preoccupy yourself with finding the fish, and then beyond that try and search out an area of clean lake bed in the area where the carp already are. So you've got to think of it, your mindset is that you are a carp hunter. You're trying to track the carp down, you're taking the game to them, and then you're going to fish effectively where they already are. You don't want to be setting up somewhere that looks good, setting out your stall and hoping the carp will come to you. That's completely wrong. As I said, that's how I used to do it through my formative years. You would put the marker float out in an area that looked good, pop it up, put some bait round it, usually with a catapult or maybe with a throwing stick, and sometimes with a spod in later years when they became popular. And sometimes we'd catch carp doing that, but a lot of the time we wouldn't. You know, it all depended on whether they were there or not, because the time was spent looking for visual aesthetics, you know, things that appealed to us rather than looking for the carp. And what appeals to us at any given time is quite likely to be completely conversely opposite to what appeals to an animal living in the wild and where that wants to be. So always think about it, track down the fish, don't be preoccupied with feature finding. However, this does play a part, but I just want you to get it right in your head. Now, if I think about how my fishing was then, again, as I said in my earlier years, that is how most people are still going about their carp fishing on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis on venues all over the country, possibly even the world, you know. That's what people do. That's how they go about their fishing. For the last best part of 30 years nearly now, my fishing, as I said, has been about finding the carp and then finding an area of clear lake bed where I can present a rig to the fish. And that's where this all comes into play, which I'm going to get into. By doing that, you're fishing where they are, you're fishing where they're happy, you're fishing where they're comfortable. You're not trying to make them come to you. As soon as you try and make carp come to you, it's a lot harder, it's a lot taller order. You're rolling the dice, you know. If you take that element out of the equation, you go to the fish, then that's it, that's done. That's the most important thing. So just try and remember that and get that incorporated into your mindset, because I think a lot of carp anglers get preoccupied with feature finding, that it is the number one thing. Feature finding should never trump good watercraft. Good watercraft will put you in the right spot at the right time, and then we need to find and dissect the lake bed to a greater or lesser degree, and I'm going to get into that in great detail, according to the situation, how much weed is out there, what the population of the lake is like, various things to consider, which again we're going to get into. So let's have a look at the primary tools that we're going to use for this exercise. So a lot of carp anglers have a preconception, I think, that feature finding is probably split between actual feature finding and measurement of the depth of water. So probably it's standard procedure for most carp anglers, I would say, to carry a marker float setup. It might surprise you that I don't carry a marker float setup at all, and I don't use a marker float more than once or twice a year in certain rare situations. When you think how common marker floats are in popular usage in carp fishing, that probably does surprise you, because I would say probably 98 or 99% of anglers base their fishing around the use of a marker float. So why don't I use one? Principally because the depth just doesn't concern me. I'm always going to fish where the carp are, or where I've seen signs of carp. So whether that's 4 foot or 24 foot or 34 foot, doesn't matter to me. I'm just going to fish where they are. Now, I have seen in the past where people have located carp, they found where they want to fish for them, and they put a float out. I've seen this several times actually over the years, probably more than a lot of times, and I've seen the float come up and they'll go, "Oh, look at this, it's 22 foot deep." I remember seeing this on Hardwick Smiths over at Linear. Well, the carp won't feed in that, and then they put the float out around the swim until they find somewhere that's 11 foot, which is over here. Completely wrong, because then you're not fishing where the carp are, you're fishing where you think they should feed, because where they are already is too deep. So if you think about it, it doesn't make any sense. Always fish where the carp are. So to me, the depth only becomes a real issue pretty much when it's swan depth or less. So if I cast out a lead and I don't feel it hit the bottom, it's got a big train going past behind us there. If I don't feel it hit the bottom, then there's only two reasons why that would be. It's either landed in really thick weed, which I will confirm by pulling the lead along the bottom, or it's landed in really, really shallow water. Now, if I pull it and it slides and I didn't feel it hit the bottom, then I've landed in very shallow water. So then the next thing that I will probably do is drop the lead size down, because a smaller lead will sink more slowly, obviously, and I'll cast that out, try and feel it down to the bottom. If through a fair few goes of that I've not managed to achieve any feeling of drop at all, then I start to think, maybe this is 2.5 foot, 3 foot deep. So at that point, if there are swans on the lake, I will start to be thinking about, do I want to commit to that spot, or do I want to find somewhere a bit deeper? Maybe it might shelve off or something. So that's a situation where I might use a float, because I might be worried about swans destroying my area. I might use a float if, let's say I'm casting to the far margin, I want to put a float across so I can walk round and put bait around the float and then cast over to it. I might use a float if measuring the depth of the water for a zig rig, and pretty much that's it, you know. I'm not preoccupied with depth at all, I'm just preoccupied with where the carp are. So that means that when I go carp fishing, I haven't got a marker rod set up, I've got a marker float in the van in case I need it, but actually the tools of the trade, as far as I'm concerned, is just my spod rod. I can use my spod rod to dissect a swim as much or as little as I require, and then of course I can use it for baiting up as well. So this is, you know, when people say, oh, they're a plumber or a sparky, and there's always one thing in their toolkit that they always find is in their hand most throughout the day, their favourite screwdriver or whatever it is. This is the thing in my toolkit that on a lot of fishing trips is in my hands a lot more than my fishing rods, that's for sure. So this is a Gray's Air Curve spod rod. I've been using this now, well, through the testing process. I think it's actually out and available now. A very, very good, powerful blank, which is capable of casting fully loaded spoms ridiculous distance. But at the same time, it's perfect for feeling the bottom and locating those areas of clear lake bed where you can present a rig to a carp. While we're on the subject of the rod, it's a very, very stiff rod. It's got a good stiff top section. Now, a lot of rod manufacturers down the years have misguidedly, in my opinion, built soft, bendy, lazy tip sections into the rods because they've sold the rod on having a softer tip section so that you can feel more. Doesn't work like that at all. You will feel a lot more through a rigid, stiff, high test curve rod, like a spod rod, which is perfect, because then it will resonate and vibrate more as you're pulling the lead across the bottom. If you've got a really soft, bendy top section, your feeling is vastly reduced. So we've got a nice stiff blank. As I said, it's the air curve spod rod, and twinned with that, I've got a Penn Affinity spod reel, which again has been on test with me now for 18 months or so, come through with flying colours, good big heavy duty big pit reel, and I've loaded that with Berkeley whiplash braid. Now, for feature finding, it's imperative to have your reel loaded with braid. Braid, if you're not aware, means that there is zero stretch. I see people casting out their rigs on normal carp fishing monofilament and trying to feel the bottom with a stretch in that is just vastly, again, reducing your feel and sensitivity. So you need to have braid. Now, I know some fisheries don't allow braid on fishing rods, but I've not come across any lake anywhere in the country that says you can't use braid on your spod or feature finding rod. Notice I didn't say marker rod. So braid is essential. I use, so I think the bottom one on here, it's been on a long time, is 30-pound Berkeley whiplash. Now, if you're fishing a venue where your range is quite restricted and maybe you're fishing up to 70 yards, then that will be fine. You won't need a shock leader. If you are going to require further casting with maybe bigger leads, like a 4-ounce lead or something, to feel the bottom further out, or if you're going to be using a big size spom or spod for long range baiting up, you will need a shock leader. And the shock leader that I've got on this is 50-pound whiplash. Now, the length of your shock leader is really, really important, and it's something that a lot of people that I go out on tutorials with get wrong until we set it right. And that the length of the shock leader needs to be, when you tie it on, and I see a lot of people, they make a shock leader and it might be 6 foot long, it might come halfway down the rod rings and then stop where it joins to the reel line. If it's anywhere short of the spool of the reel itself, it's not doing its job for you at all. The shock leader needs to come. The general rule of thumb is that when you're in the casting position, which is with your lead hanging about 6 foot from the tip of the rod, you want no less than 3 turns around the spool. I think I've got 4 turns, 3 to 4 turns. And that's it. That's then going to cushion that impact and take the strain of what you're casting. Anything that comes short of the reel is not going to do anything for you whatsoever. So we'll just back that off down. Now, we've got on the end of here, this is my perfect feature finding setup. Not necessarily a feature, as I said, and I'm going to get into this in a moment, anywhere on the bottom that's clean. But what I've got on here is a tail rubber and a quick change link and my lead. Now, the lead size will be changed according to distance and possibly depth. If it is inordinately shallow, then the lead size will come down. Generally, I mean, this is quite a big one, this is a 3.5, but generally my leads are about 2.5 ounces on this sort of setup. The leads that I tend to favour are the dumpier Roger and Kerry types that I get from West Country leads, which are really nice. But for really long range casting, you want something that is more tapered. If you've got a narrow shoulder like that, then you will find that you'll be able to coax the lead through any weed that might be out there on the lake without it jamming up. Now, this goes back again to the whole ensemble that people tend to use when they are casting out in the lake to see what's out there. They'll have a marker float with a big set of vanes on it, and attached to that, or hanging next to it, will be a feature finding lead, which is one of those great big bulbous things with massive prongs coming out all around it. Now, you really couldn't design anything better. I mean, if you're fishing a weedy lake, you couldn't design anything better for jamming in weed than that. It's like as good as a weed rake with all those prongs and the flights and everything. Absolute disaster. And when I see people casting out trying to find clear spots on weedy lakes using that full contraption, I just feel sorry for them. I just think, my God, you have got your work cut out. That's really, really hard work. Unless you happen to land bang on something first time, which is unlikely on a very weedy lake, you're just going to cast it out, it's going to jam, you're going to winch in loads and loads of weed, then you've got to clear it and you cast it out again. Absolutely soul destroying. But with this sort of setup, with a nice thin taper on the shoulder of the lead, no prongs or anything like that, and just a tail rubber, you'll be able to pull that through weed and onto clear spots, which means that you will get the full potential of your cast. So when you cast, it will land down in weed perhaps, and then you can just pull it very often out of weed and just keep coming back towards you, and you can work a larger section of the lake bed. Now, if you've got a lake that is very thickly weeded with something like Canadian pondweed, which is the most common one, then doing the exercise that I've just said, coaxing it through, will be absolutely fine. If you are fishing a lake with loads of blanket weed, that candy floss type stuff, then it becomes a lot more complicated, because pretty much as soon as you start dragging it, it gets festooned in that and you can't feel anything. That's a lot more problematic, needs a lot of time and patience. But again, using a tapered lead like this with just a tail rubber will make your life a lot easier. Now again, it's very, very important to remember that my preoccupation in carp fishing is trying to find those carp and get as close to them as I can. I'm not interested, as I said, in what depth of water they're in. Wherever they are, I'm going to fish for them, if I can get on them. So with this setup, what I'm trying to focus on is locating an area of bottom in the vicinity of the carp that I can present a rig onto. It really is as simple as that. So with this bare lead setup on braid, I can cast it into the area where I've seen most of the activity and then pull it along the bottom. Now, if I pull it along the bottom and it's really weedy and covered in all kinds of debris and detritus, then the tip, as I pull the lead, the tip of the rod will graunch. I call it graunching, where it goes, where it's just like resisting you and juddering, and you can't put a rig there. Simple. If you pull the rod and the lead slides without overdue, or undue, I should say, resistance, you can put a rig there. And really, guys, it's as simple as that. If it slides, you can put a rig there. And if it's where you've seen the carp, most of the time that's all you need to know. And I'm not really caring too much whether I'm on silt, clay, sand, gravel, mud. If that slides and it's where the fish are, put a rig there. And it's a really nice, stripped down, but highly effective, very simplified way of carp fishing that does away with a lot of clutter, the whole other setup of the marker float system, and being preoccupied with depths and drop-offs and so on. Now, in the process of pulling that lead along, if I do find something that either cracks down really hard or trembles over some fine shingle perhaps, which is always nice, clean hard bottoms are even better for presenting a rig on, if they're there. But always remember that quite often carp will feed on soft, sludgier, silty bottoms. So, you know, that's where you've got to fish where they are. But in the process of looking for somewhere where the lead slides, if I find somewhere where it just trembles over pea shingle, or it slides like a knife through butter, just like, phew, that's indicating a very, very clean area. If I find that, then that's where I'll fish. But if it's just sliding and it's the same everywhere and that's where the carp are, just fish that. Don't overcomplicate it. So what we're going to do now, we're going to decamp to another swim where we've got a little bit more room. We'll do a little bit of the casting process, feeling the lead down and the types of bottom that are out there and the sort of thing that you can feel, and we'll put it into action. So what we're doing here is, hypothetically, we're in a swim where we've seen carp. We pinpointed the area where most of the activity was, and we're going to cast out our bare lead in that vicinity and look for areas of bottom which are clean and presentable. It's very, very important, vital in fact, that every time you make a cast, you stop the lead before it hits the water. So track it as it goes through the air. If you can't see the lead against the sky, get yourself up Specsavers. Track it as it goes through the air, and then just before it hits the water, you're going to stop the line manually, because you won't be clipped up at this point, with your hand on the spool, with a finger on the lip of the spool. Ideally, you want to be stopping the lead when it's about 3 foot above the water, just before it's going to impact. And as you're doing that, you're going to keep the rod up in this sort of position, so that you've got a nice big angle between the rod and the line, or the braid I should say. Now, when that lead hits the bottom of the lake, you will get a greater element of feel proportion to the angle between the tip of the rod and the braid. So by keeping the rod up and a big angle between the tip of the rod and the braid, you will get a great feel. If you finish the cast with the rod down flat and you open that angle right out, you will feel a lot less, even with braid. So stopping the lead and feeling it down is very, very important. You may find that when you feel the lead down, it will land on something rock hard and clean to begin with. Fantastic, make careful note of that. And it's very, very important to remember that we haven't got a float, obviously. So if we find something that is really, really nice, we need to be able to go back to it. And we can only do that using two tools. One is the clip on the reel, and the second is the skyline. The skyline is full of information. The opposite bank, the trees, the pylons, the telegraph poles, whatever it is, there's always detail. And every cast that you make with a bare lead, you need to be carefully noting where your lead has landed in line with whatever it is on the horizon. Every cast, get into that habit. You get the splash, look up, line it up, right, it's on the corner of that, it's in line with that, whatever it is, and make note. Because as you start pulling that lead along the bottom and you find something really nice and you haven't done that, sometimes going back to it and finding it again is impossible. So just remember, guys, bare lead fishing is very, very effective, like in this style, but you have to notate carefully the horizon where you've landed. Now, if you land in thick silt, you'll know that from the outset, because actually this cast I've already started moving the lead, but when I started this cast there was quite a lot of resistance. The tip bent round quite a lot where the lead was stuck, and then it popped out and slid. That's the perfect example where you've landed in thickish silt. The lead's in there, and with a bit of pressure you've popped it out, and then you're just sliding along that surface crust. So that will indicate silt. Silt isn't a problem, you know. I would just generally lengthen the hook link or fish a slow sinking bait. If it's the area that the fish are in, it wouldn't stop me fishing it. Silt, carp love silt. Silt holds more food than gravel. It's just that gravel and hard areas of lake bed are nicer for us to present our rigs on without anything going wrong. But if the fish are in the silt, always be happy to fish for them. So by putting the rod over to one side, I usually keep it up high like that, just coax the lead along the bottom methodically. You don't want to be moving it really quickly. Just bring it along the bottom, feeling for any change, any disruption in that pattern. Now I'm just bumping across silty mud, doesn't really matter what it is, it's just sliding. Now look, the tip of the rod's barely bending and the lead is sliding towards me. Now, if that is all I've got, absolutely fine. I can fish that. Look, it's just sliding along. There's nothing out there that's going to prevent me from being presented. It's just trundling along with no resistance at all. As I said, if that's all you've got, absolutely fine, just fish it. That's where the carp are. Now in the process of coaxing that lead along the bottom, you may find somewhere where the lead suddenly travels really freely, almost like your lead's been cut off, it will just skate. They're really good spots because they mean that all of the silt and leaf litter or anything that is down there has been pushed out the way and cleared off by the carp. If you find something that is really clean on the bottom where the lead really slides a little bit easier than elsewhere what you've done on other casts, then that's the area I'd like to go back to. Additionally, if I was just pulling it along and it just trundled along a little purr of pea shingle or fine gravel, again, I would be interested in going back to that. If it's in the vicinity of where the carp are, it's a good spot to put a rig on. And then I just coax it all the way back in. Now the lake we're doing this on here at Suffolk Water Park, there isn't any weed, not on this half of the lake. So we're really not encountering any problems. If you're fishing a lake where there isn't any weed, then the whole process of doing this is vastly reduced. It is literally as simple as fishing where you see them, cast out, get fishing. Well, why would you disturb them anymore? And I find that the less weed there is, the quicker I get fishing. Because if there isn't any weed, all I'm going to do is cast out where they are, fire a few baits over the top, and get fishing. Perhaps if I want to use a spom, then I'll put this out. I always do a sanity check with a bare lead, just in case there's anything out there, particularly on lakes that I don't know and I haven't fished before. You do want to do a couple of casts just to check that there isn't a load of weed out there, or even worse, patches of weed that could trip you up. Don't assume that you've got a blank canvas to work with. So I'll always do a couple of test casts, just like sanity casts I call them, just to make sure that everything's clean. And then beyond that, I will then get this this rod that I found something, which will at that point will be clipped up, and then goes out around the wrapping sticks, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, and I will measure the distance exactly, put the line into the clip, and that's job done. And then that means that I've got a fixed reference of distance to where the carp are and where the lead slides, and in conjunction with the skyline detail, I can get back on that day or night, no matter what. I can also unclip the lead and clip on a spom or a spod or a bait rocket and put bait over the top. If I'm fishing a weedy lake, then you're kind of forced to use a spod or a spom to put your bait out, because if it's really thick weed, then all your freebies with your throwing stick or catapult will just be kind of lost. You want your bait where your rig is most of the time. So if it's weedy, I tend to use a device to drop my bait exactly where I want it. If you're in a situation like this where there isn't any weed, then I would favour a catapult or a throwing stick, and actual accuracy is less important. You're fishing a zone rather than a spot. So hopefully that makes sense. We're going to do a few more casts, see if we can locate an area of really hard bottom so that you can see that. And at the moment, all I'm picking up is just silt and mud, but I'm sure there's some harder spots out there. So hopefully you can see that, guys. I stopped the line with my fingers there. I've got the rod in close to my body. I keep control of it with my left hand so that when I do stop it, or if I'm using the clip, it doesn't lurch down flat, because that can really cause you problems if you're fishing in shallow water. That time that you've got of the drop from when the lead is stopped to when it hits the bottom could be half a second less. So in shallow water, if you've got that, where you're getting pulled off balance and the rod gets pulled down because you've hit the clip too hard, by the time you get it up to where you need it to be to feel the lead at the bottom, it's over. You've lost that. So there's just a style that I've adapted that allows me to feel the lead down to the bottom no matter what the depth of water. So you'll see that when I make the cast, I then bring the rod close to my body like that, use my fingers here to feather, and it means that when I do hit the clip or stop it manually, if it's a little bit brisk, I still keep control of the rod and it stays in that upright position with that all-important angle between the tip of the line and the braid. So all we're going to do is tighten down to the lead, and we're going to use the rod to, look at that, it's just sliding beautifully, perfectly fishable out there. Just clean mud or silt. Just coax it along, feeling for any change or variation. It just dug in a little bit there, so when it feels a bit stickier and it's harder to pull, that's probably where you've gone into a little bit of a divot or a crater where leaf litter and debris has gathered. There will be areas like that all over the place, and conversely there will be areas of cratered out areas that are polished clean, or just flat bottom that isn't cratered at all, but it will have, like the clouds in the sky, it will have clear bits and then it will have choddier bits. So don't forget, guys, this is theoretical feature finding. I'm not in a swim that I'm fishing or where I've seen carp, so I've just started casting a bit to the left, see if I can find a different type of lake bed so that I can show you the difference. Now you'll see on this cast that I just made, the tip really cracked back. You know, that's a classic reverberation that you get from landing with your lead on a clean, hard bottom. And those are usually the best spots. But don't worry if they're not there or if you can't find them where you've seen fish. Again, if I had seen fish over there at 70 yards, but I found somewhere over here to the left 60 yards away from them where it cracked down, that's no good. That's a long way. You know, I know carp travel around the lake, but always try and fish where they are. Don't let your ideas of where the carp want to feed affect your decision making. Just fish where they are. But we've cast this out and we've got a very good contact. So this told me it's landed on a very, very hard bit of lake bed. And we can then pull the lead along the bottom, and it's just trundling. I don't know if you can see that. It's bumping and bouncing on very, very fine shingle. So I'm going to cast that again, because I was pretty much off the near edge of whatever it is. So if it's a small spot, or even if it's a large spot, I tend to try and fish the front leading edge of the spot rather than stretching my lines across it. So I'm going to go back out to what we think we found. That's interesting, that went deeper and softer, so I think I've just gone over the back of whatever it is. So I'm just going to see if I pull up and onto it, yeah. And we're just going to, there you go. I mean, it's super clean there. It's almost moving without me pulling it. Oh, it's delicious there. For about 2 foot, and then we're off it, and we're back on it. Well, there you go, guys. Quite an in-depth look into a very, very important part of your carp fishing armoury. Digest the information, put the skills into your fishing. Always remember, find those carp, fish where they are. Don't expect them to come to you, and your results will be a lot better. We'll see you on the next Fundamentals of Carp Fishing in conjunction with JRC. Thanks for watching.